An era of peace, love, rock and roll, Henry Diltz, a musician turned photographer, found himself in the right place at the right time. What once started as a hobby quickly developed into documenting some of rock and roll's most prominent figures.
Well, when I went to college for the first couple of years, I was interested in psychology. I wanted to study psychology because I was very interested in people and what makes people tick. I mean, that's one of my primary things I'm interested in. And I went to a couple colleges, and I ended up at University of Hawaii, and it was in the late 50s, like 59. And folk music was the music in the land. The Kingston Trio, was the Beatles, our Beatles. And I bought a banjo and brought it to Hawaii. I really wanted to play like Pete Seeger played the 5-string banjo. And I walked into a coffee house there called the Green Sleeves Coffee House. Coffee houses were like in the beatnik days, in the 50s, they would play classical music and play chess and have poetry readings. In the 60s, folk music kind of took over, and people would come in with their guitar and sit in the corner and play. So there were a lot of folk coffee houses, and this one in Hawaii was one. So for a number of years, 4 years, I played in this coffee house, and we'd form different groups, duos, trios, go play a club somewhere, many things. And then we decided we would come to LA to seek our fortune and make a record and get a manager and all that. And we did. 4 years, we were a folk group called the Modern Folk Quartet. And we traveled back and forth across the country playing folk clubs, college concerts, because every college would have folk concerts, and sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 acts, and we would be one of the acts, and then TV shows. Okay, so I'm getting close to it now. So we did this for a number of years. We made records with Warner Brothers Records, and with Phil Spector, we made some singles, and we just played all over the country, every state. Well, one day in early 1966, we were leaving Ann Arbor. I forget. Well, we were leaving the University of Michigan. We'd played there the night before, and in the morning we were leaving town, and we had a motorhome that we were in on this particular tour. Often it was a van. This time it was a motorhome. And as we pulled out of town, somebody said, "Look, a secondhand store. We got to pull in there and see what's going on." And so we walked in, and the guy in front of me, Cyrus Faryar, who was the guy who had owned the Greensleeves Coffee House, he was now in the group. We sang 4-part harmony. He was in front of me. As we walked in the door, there was a table of secondhand cameras. They were little, used Japanese 35 millimeter cameras. And I was right behind him, just itching to buy anything, and he said, "Oh, a camera. I'll have one of those." And he picked it up, and I said, "Yeah, why not? Me too." I grabbed one. And I think a third guy in the group bought one. And then Cyrus said, "Well, now let's pull into the next drugstore and I'll buy film for everybody." And he handed us a box, a yellow Kodak box. And I put it in the camera. I said, "Okay, well, it's in there now. Well, how do I do these numbers on the camera?" And he said, "Well, look on the box. It says sunlight, 250 and 8 at 8." And I said, "Okay, there's 250, there's 8. Let's go out in the sunlight and take pictures." So we did that for a few weeks until we got home to LA, and I had all this film, and I never even stopped to think of what it was going to be. Black and white, prints, slides. It turned out to be transparencies. They were slides, and that was very important because, I hadn't even seen any of the pictures yet. So I said, "Well, let's have a slideshow. We'll get a projector, and we'll invite all of our hippie friends." And we, in a room there, and when the first slide hit the wall, 8 feet wide, glowing in the dark with color, and these were moments from our tour. And, on the road, the various things we saw and did, and it just blew my mind. Now, if it had been black and white, I might have looked at a proof sheet with lots of little black and white photos and said, oh, that's cute, that's fun, but I'm a musician, you know. But because of that slideshow and sharing that with all our friends and being able to, I said, it's just like you're back there. I mean, this is magic, you know. Part of it was big. It was on the wall, and it was big, and it was glowing with color, and all our friends could laugh and share it with us, and we tell the stories. And I just thought, this is amazing. And my thought was, I'm going to take more of these slides so we can have another slideshow. So I started photographing all my friends in the daytime, and they were all musicians. They were people who lived in Laurel Canyon, you know, and they were like Mama Cass and David Crosby and Stephen Stills and other musicians you never heard of. But I kept photographing them so I would have stuff to show on the weekend. And I would even photograph friends of mine, and then they'd come to the show in the weekend, and I'd show them the pictures I took of them, and they would say, "Oh my God, I didn't even know you took that," and that was wonderful. And I learned to be kind of a documentary fly on the wall photographer by doing that. And then, as I say, one by one, all these people in Laurel Canyon became famous. You know, and the magazines started calling me, wanting to use pictures, record companies. I mean, I started doing album covers and publicity pictures. And because I was a musician, I fit in with everybody. And being a musician is kind of like being in a club. You know, you meet another musician and automatically you say, oh, you know, yeah, we're the same. We're cool. It really is a club. And also musicians hang out. They hang out, you know, for hours in recording studios, airports, airplanes, motel rooms, backstage at a concert. It's a lot of downtime hanging out. And it's a kind of a nice way of life, you know, and I could do that. I wasn't a pushy photographer that was intent on getting the picture. I was there to hang out. I mean, if I saw something great, I'd take a picture, but I wasn't pushy about it.
Yeah, and that brings me, because I did look at quite a few of yours on the Morrison Hotel Gallery, and it did look like just these very candid moments of people just being people in the moment. I love photos like that. I thought it was really brilliant. I think they're beautiful photos as well.
Yeah, and the main reason that they look that way is because I really was hanging out, and I could do that because I was a musician. You know, if I'd have been seen as kind of a professional photographer, people wouldn't have let me sit around. I sat around because I was their friend. I was a musician. I was there. Photography was secondary to them. I wasn't in their face. And I would wait until I saw something interesting, and then I'd quietly take it without bugging anybody. And I had practiced on my friends when they said, "I didn't even know you took that." Well, I loved that idea. And so gradually, you know, I got a partner who is a graphic artist, and we did 100 album covers over a few years period in the late 60s, early 70s. And I just kept shooting and shooting. I mean, film, I used a Nikon camera and I shot film, and it was almost always slides, except people wanted black and white for publicity. So I'd have to shoot black and white sometimes. So I've ended up with hundreds of thousands of black and white pictures, as well as color pictures. And now, after 55 years of doing it, because that was 66 when I picked up the camera, after 55 years, it's books, gallery shows, museum shows, stuff like that. And I still photograph people. I mean, last weekend or a week ago, I took pictures of Lucas Nelson Band. That's Willie Nelson's son. Really, really great, you know, sort of folk rock band. In addition to that, I photograph stuff all day long. I mean, it's not a job. I just have my little camera, and I see a sign or a T-shirt or a flower or an old truck or whatever, you know, and I take pictures. I probably take 100 pictures a day. I mean, my coffee cup, my teacup, you know. When I go to a restaurant and order food and you're waiting, you know, for the menu and you're waiting for the food, I always look at the fork. It's that silver thing with the four, tines. And if there's any lights on the ceiling, they reflect in the fork. Oh, there's little red and blue dots on the fork. And I get a close-up of it, and it fills the frame really nicely. And I love that. It makes me feel satisfied, the frame. Somebody once told me, he said, "Oh, Henry, you have a framing Jones." And I said, that is exactly right. I have a framing Jones. So, and then, of course, all during that time was the hippie, the peace and love hippie movement, right? And I was a peace and love hippie. I wore love beads and had long hair and, smoked God's herb. As everybody did, every musician did, and that's how come all that great music came out of Laurel Canyon. That was a way of life, because smoking a little bit of those flowers enhances your senses. It makes you relax. It makes you feel, good, and you want to play music. You want to hear music. It stimulates the arts. Whether you're painting or cooking or playing music or whatever, photographing.
How would you describe that time then? Because you said, it was almost like a cultural movement in a sense, I wasn't alive during that time, and I can only hear the stories from, people like you that lived those experiences. So how would you describe how that time period also influenced the photos that you took or the people that you hung out with?
I was photographing that period of time and the people that were going through it, and it was, I would say it was a flowering of feeling. It was a renaissance. And it really was, because, what happened was there was folk music. You don't write a folk song. They're 100 years old. You find an old cowboy song or a sailor song or something. But then when the Beatles played Ed Sullivan, they were singing, "She loved you, yeah, yeah, yeah." And all the folk groups saw that night in '64 and said, wow, that is so beautiful. They're singing their feelings, and it's about love. And what are we singing about the ox driver for? When these guys, and so we went out, we had a stand-up bass, and we changed it for an electric bass. We electrified our guitars, and then that was the beginning of folk rock. So that's where the Buffalo Springfield and the Byrds and a lot of those groups, Crosby, Stills, Nash, these were all really kind of folk singers who got into kind of, pop music, folk rock music. And the thing is, and this is why it was a flowering, because people started writing their own songs. Up to that point, there were the songwriters and the singers. The Brill Building had all these songwriters, and they would write, and the singers would sing them. Frank Sinatra never wrote a song. Elvis Presley never wrote a song. They sang songs that songwriters wrote. Then they would pick the ones they liked and they would sing them. Well, when people like Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and James Taylor started writing their own songs, a la the Beatles. Now, the Beatles, they didn't write their own songs in the beginning, right? They sang Roll Over Beethoven and Blue Suede Shoes like everybody. But they then started writing their own songs. Probably their manager was very smart and said, you'll get all that publishing money if you write your own feelings. So that was a sea change in the music industry. Now you had the artist telling their own story about life, how they felt about life. It wasn't something some other guy wrote, And so when you go to see a beautiful person like Joni Mitchell, singing love songs from her own heart, from her own experience, that was the flowering and of a new form of music. And yeah, I'm so pleased that I happen to be in the middle of it. I've said, I could have thought there in like 68, I could have thought, boy, there's something going on here. I better get a camera and document this, but that never happened, right? It just happened naturally. I wanted more slides for my slideshow, and these musicians needed pictures, and I was more than happy to take them. And it became a career kind of, and the building of a musical archive, a history of that time and place of music. I would say It's the LA, singer-songwriter time, the Laurel Canyon period of time. Woodstock happened, and I was the official photographer at Woodstock and Monterey Pop. And there was 450,000 kind of, peace and love hippies in the middle of that field. And there were no fights, and there was no bad vibes, because everybody was enjoying, the moment and the great music,
What would you describe then, like, out of all this experience of being around these incredible musicians, and friends and strangers alike, what would you say would be one of your greatest memories that you hold from that time?
People say to me, well, what's your favorite picture? And I say, every single picture I've taken has been a part of my life. It's been a part of my experience. Oh yeah, that day we did that, we did this. I mean, you can't say. I mean, I would say Paul McCartney was a Beatle. He was lovely to hang out with. And that happened because I was in New York City one day getting some film developed, and I met a girl also getting her film developed in a photo lab, and that was Linda Eastman. And we got to be friends, and we had lunch, and, and she came to LA and called me up. And then I was surprised to see she married Paul McCartney, right? And she called me one day and said, Henry, we're out in Malibu, and we need portraits of the two of us together, because I'm on the record now, on the Ram album. And so she was Paul's photographer, but she needed to be in the picture. And she remembered me and said, and remembered me as not being a complicated or a pushy guy, kind of laid back. And she said, could you come out and spend the afternoon and just photograph us around the pool? And I did. And one of the pictures got used on the cover of Life magazine, which was kind of the holy grail at the time for photographers, Life magazine, National Geographic. So that was a wonderful thing. And a couple of years later, they called me to go to the Virgin Islands and spend a week with them, floating on these boats on Watermelon Bay in the American Virgin Islands while they recorded London Town. They recorded all the musical tracks for London Town.
If you could go back in time and to your younger self, would you have any words of advice to him, or what would you tell him? Not necessarily if you would do anything different, but what would you tell him?
Well, first of all, that's a famous saying, if you want to play the violin, get a violin and play it for 8 hours a day. In a year, you'll be doing concerts, If you want to be a photographer, well, get a camera and start photographing. So young people come up to me and say, I want to do what you do. What should I do? And if they're young enough, they're in high school or something, I say, well, photograph your friends. That's what I did. I learned by photographing my friends, So photograph your friends, photograph your family, your dog, your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad, your friends in high school. You'll be glad years later that you have those pictures. And if you're really ready to photograph groups and musicians, then find a local group that you like, go to the club, meet them, offer to take pictures for free. Just say, look, let me take some group shots of you guys, and you can use them and give them to them, and eventually, some other group will say, oh, who took those? Oh, this girl, this guy. Whoa, you got the number? Let's call them up. We need some. And eventually, it'll spread. And I also say to young people, don't just photograph groups on the stage playing music, because we all can see that. That's what we see all the time. Fans want to see what those musicians are like off the stage. So you want to get to be friends with them and say, let me come to a rehearsal, And I also say, when you're at the rehearsal, when there's a little break in the time, say, hey, let me just take a quick group shot. Just stand over here. No one's ever said no, You just stand together, okay, click, 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 and then, wow. And you've got something that nobody else has. And maybe that group will become famous, and wow, you'll have the earliest shots of them. That is what happened to me. So it certainly is one formula, of doing it. So I keep a journal. So I have journals for all those years of what happened and the pictures that go with the journal. So nowadays, of course, that's obviously books. or gallery shows or museum shows, you know. A couple of things, being in the moment, very important. And in college, I took a course on existentialism, which means you know, the past is past, the future is yet to come. This is all we have, is the moment, and you have a free choice from this moment. So I used to think, well, I consider myself an existentialist, but I can't reconcile the fact that I'm holding on to all these old moments, right? That's not very current of me to have be famous in my life for collecting old moments. But then somebody said, yeah, but what you do is bring those old moments into the present. And so I said, okay, I like that. And when you say, you know, look, you're busy taking pictures, so you're not there. No, I'm even more there. I'm observing everything. I'm looking at everything. And it's my joy, my passion to do that. So I am very much in the moment and very present, you know, for all of that stuff. Life is a mystery, you know. I put a picture of an old friend of mine on social media the other day, and I said, wow, well, Bill Martin, he was a singer and a writer and all these things, and he's gone now. He walked into the next room years ago, and I said, I remember this day so well. I remember those days living in Laurel Canyon, and they're gone. You know, where are they? Where did they go? I'm over here now, and I've got a whole bunch of other friends, and I'm doing, you know, every day is an adventure. There's so many things going on, you know.